Hello and welcome to another episode of the ADHD Goals podcast. I have a fascinating guest for you today. Her name is Dr. Rebecca Jackson, and she is an industry leader in brain health and optimizing the brain to enhance how you feel and function. She brings 15 years of brain balance experience to her role as Chief Programs Officer. In this role, she has published research on improving cognition, development and well-being, drives programmatic enhancements and creates new programs to meet the growing demands of people wanting to achieve more for themselves and their children. And she is also the author of Back on Track, a practical guide to help kids of all ages thrive. How are you today, Rebecca?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Good stuff. So your book, Back on Track, a practical guide to help kids of all ages thrive. I'm assuming the all ages part includes adults as well.
You know, it does. It's our brain and how we function has a lot to do with childhood development. But as an adult, I'm not thinking about my development. I'm thinking about how do I get through today successfully. So while the book is targeted and focused on kids at various ages and stages, everything that you learn applies to all ages. So everything you learn, especially in the teen section, applies to our adult brain as well.
Fantastic. Well, before we get into the book and all its insights, I would love to know a little bit more about you and how you got into the role that you do now. So tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. I feel like it's a long, winding path. And had I set out to try to land here, I don't think I could have done it on purpose, but here we are. So I started my professional career as a chiropractor. I've always been drawn to understanding the what and the why behind something.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always the person where if I had a headache before I'd popped the Advil or Tylenol, I would think through, did I get enough sleep? Have I had enough water? Is it fall allergies happening? And really wanting to understand what's driving the symptom. So I think that's just kind of a personal life philosophy of mine. And then
Curiosity.
yeah, curiosity and not wanting to cover a symptom. If there's something that I can do to change it so that I don't need to deal with the symptom, to me, that's even more powerful than masking the symptom. I think symptoms are our body's way of bringing attention to something to say, hey, something's going on here. You've got the opportunity to influence it or to change it.
Yeah.
And I started as the chiropractor and practiced in private practice for about a decade and loved it. And then my husband's job moved us across the country and we had our first child. And so I decided to stay home. And I found very quickly I needed more mental stimulation. And so I ended up taking additional classes. At that time, being a new mom, I was really interested in development. And I wasn't finding the information I wanted. I could find information to say, sing songs, play patty cake, play the sand table. But I wanted to know what was happening in the brain because I wanted to be able to optimize development for my own child. So I started to take a series of courses on the neurology of pediatric disorders. And what I was learning was fascinating, understanding that ADHD is not behavior, it's not discipline, it's not lack of routine. There are structural differences in the brain that can make some areas harder. Dyslexia, same thing. It comes back to what's happening in the brain. And so understanding the root cause of some of these challenges just was so eye-opening to me. And my mom was an elementary school psychologist. And so I'd call her every day after class and say, Mom, what are the schools doing about this? If a child is struggling with impulsivity and paying attention, what are the schools doing to change it?
Yeah.
And her answer was, we're not. We put strategies in place to create motivation strategies or discipline strategies, or we'll pull a child from the classroom to put them in a less distracting environment or give them more time. But she'll say is if a child comes to us at a young age with a challenge, they're going to exit the school system with that same challenge. It might look different at different ages, but the approach that they were taking at the time wasn't changing the brain. It was providing modification. And so I came home one day and said to my husband, I don't want to wait till the kids are back in school. I feel like providing people with information to understand why you're seeing what you're seeing and what you can do again to influence or change it, to me is motivating. And so that's how we ended up starting to work with a company called Brain Balance. That's a company that's focused on building and strengthening networks and pathways in the brain to help the brain function so that it's more mature, it's stronger, faster, more efficient, so that you have greater success in the things that you do.
Mm. No, you said something interesting there about, what are the schools doing about this? And something that's been on my mind recently, well, I suppose for a long time, but my kids went to a Montessori school. Now in the UK, Montessori schools aren't really a thing. You have Montessori nurseries, and that's like a cute sort of alternative thing, but it never really goes on. It's not really considered as part of the curriculum the way Montessori is taught. But I didn't know anything about it until my kids went there. And when I went there to see what they did, I was fascinated by it. And then this whole story about Maria Montessori, and, she was a scientist, but she was, the way men were in those days, they said, oh, we'll put you with the kids. And she took this approach of these, I can't remember what it was about the kids, but they had learning, disabilities, I think. And she wanted to really understand how she could teach them and put all her scientific method into that. And it amazed me how, I was learning things, finding things so much easier by, going and playing with these things. And I just thought to myself, why is this not available to everybody? And I know in the States, Montessori is a much bigger thing, but here there's literally no schools that go all the way through. There's probably just one or two that I know of, and you have to pay for that. It's not treated the same. And I just think that's in a world now where we're having a much better understanding of neurodiversity, we should be considering something like that to teach in different ways. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's just been something that's on my mind.
Yeah, and I don't want to take anything away from the public school system.
Mm.
I grew up in the public school system. We've got a lot of educators in my family. So grateful and thankful for all the work that they do. But I do think, like so many systems and scenarios, they're limited by the tools and budget and funding and resources that they have. And so I truly believe our educators absolutely want what's best for our kids. But it's a system, it's a business like anything else. And so having the ability to say, maybe we need to look at this from a different perspective. How can we change? And I know, in the US school system, it's so focused on testing and outcomes. And, in my ideal world, we'd really take a step back and bring in the conversation about brain health and wellness, because getting all A's doesn't guarantee, a fulfilled, productive life, but having a well-rounded balance of an ability to make and keep friends and have social interactions and find enjoyment in learning. Those are all things that spark joy and productivity in our brain that helps to just contribute to overall brain health and wellness. And so, yes, my ideal world would take a very different look at our education system and have a much more balanced approach that incorporates movement and physical activity and creativity and recognizes and celebrates the differences. There are unique differences in our brains, and that benefits our world. I could never be an engineer or an elevator repairman, and thank goodness there are those brains that can do that. And then, that parlays into neurodiversity in the workforce. Is we need different brains solving our problems and working together, but understanding the differences in the brain. And if I can understand a little bit more about your brain, then maybe we can work together in a more productive, collaborative way. And so to me, it's always about how do we optimize what you currently have
Mhm.
so that you're more efficient in your productivity, in your emotional resilience, in your ability to stay on task and block out distractions so that you're able to it reduces challenges and increases successes. That was a long winding story. That came back to the full circle of education.
Yeah. So I wonder, just before we dive into discuss some of the um, daily lifestyle approaches that you talk about in your book that help us feel and function better, would it be useful for those listening at home for you to describe what those differences that you mentioned earlier in the ADHD brain, just in case anybody isn't quite familiar on the details.
Yeah. When I first started working in the space of development, when we were talking about ADHD or autism or dyslexia, these things were always described by the symptoms or the challenges. And so when we think about ADHD, it was described by struggles with behavior or struggles with attention. And to me, that really minimizes what the scenario actually is. And so I think it's so important to look at it from the brain perspective. So, what we know today about ADHD is that there are structural differences in the brain that impact many different brain regions, which is why ADHD is not behavior and attention. It can impact those things, but it also impacts emotional regulation. It impacts executive functioning and an ability to organize and structure time and manage time. And so understanding that ADHD impacts many separate brain regions and ultimately it comes down to a difference in connectivity of the brain. And so for the ADHD brain, it's as though some regions of the brain can be up to about 30% behind a peer. So what that can look like is if I've got a 10-year-old sitting in a grade 5 classroom who does have an ADHD brain, that 10-year-old might be brilliant and just an awesome kid. But in some aspects of that of development, that 10-year-old might be more on par with the child in grade 2. And so, when you think about what would your expectations be of a 7-year-old versus a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old is going to need more prompts and redirection to stay on task. They're not going to work independently as long. When they're frustrated and upset, it's going to be bigger and more emotional. So understanding that there are differences in the brain that can make some things harder, I think is just a really good place to start from. And especially as a parent, when you're parenting a child with ADHD, having realistic expectations sets both of you up for success. And so understanding where my child is today so that I can set you up for success. So rather than saying, I need you to go clean your room and do your homework and pack your lunch for tomorrow, I might say, go bring me your dirty laundry. Let's
Mhm.
start with one step. Excuse me, have success with that step and say, great. Now that we've done your dirty laundry, let's make your bed. So breaking things down into more manageable steps so that we can start to build from there. But then I think it's also really important to recognize the downstream effect is if you've got an individual who your name is being called out in class over, and you're intelligent and you're capable, but you're missing the mark. You did the homework, but you forgot to turn it in, or you did the homework, but you missed 3 steps in the process, or you made some silly mistakes, even though you know how to do the math problem. I think the result of that ends up being a lot of internalized shame and
Mhm.
frustration of no matter how hard I work, it's not enough. And the line to me in parenting that I think is so dangerous is the why can't you just? We all assume that your brain works the way my brain does. So if I'm able to do a homework assignment and remember to turn it in, it's easy to look at a child to say, you don't care, you're not trying. Why can't you just do that? Rather than understanding that your brain works different than my brain. So works for me is not going to be what works for you. So let me learn as much as I can about what's working for you, where the challenges are, so that I can identify and put plans and supports in place to help bridge the gap in the short term and then look and work towards a longer term improvement.
I just have a couple of questions about the stat that you said, the 30% developmental delay. I've heard that before and I've used it a lot myself, but I also some vagueness about it or questions about, does that mean at some point in an adult brain that that developmental delay has caught up? Um, and also in terms of that developmental delay, is that specifically in, like, let's say, what we might describe as like maturity, like the executive functioning things, like being able to reason what is appropriate, or making things, doing things in a logical order, or things like that? I mean, it doesn't hinder necessarily their ability to understand or learn. I'm just curious to know what that term covers.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that because the more detail we can get with this, then the more
Yeah.
helpful the information is. So I'm going to first start by answering the question about does that developmental delay catch up over time in adults? And this is fascinating because when I first got involved in this space over 15 years ago, ADHD was talked about as a childhood disorder. That has now been reframed. ADHD is now considered a lifespan disorder. And, I think the thought used to be that many people outgrew it. Well, what we're seeing in neuroimaging and studies is structural differences in the brain persist into adulthood. What happens is adults have a better awareness of self and a better ability to put in strategies to succeed. So if you know that you've got a tendency to get distracted while you're working on something, you learn to turn off the alerts on your phone and silence the alerts on your computer so that you've got fewer distractions when working, or, using a day planner. So we can learn strategies that we can apply to help us be successful. So even adults who self-report a reduction in symptoms still demonstrate on neuroimaging structural differences in the brain. So while we get better at success strategies, it tells me that adult brain is still having to work harder than others in order to accomplish the same thing. And I think that's important because that means extra energy and resources are being diverted to be applied to those modification strategies so that you can accomplish tasks and get through the day. Then the next part of your question was talking about essentially which parts of the brain are we seeing that reduction and is it considered maturity? And I think when we think about development, something that really helps my brain understand this is development starts simple and builds in complexity over time. So, an infant starts with the ability to lift up their head and then they learn how to coordinate their body to roll over and then we sit and crawl and then, become basketball players or dancers or, it continues to build in complexity over time. The other thing that happens is we've got that bottom up development where we start to be able to integrate more functions to work together. And then we develop this top down control. And I think of the top down control as the conductor of the orchestra. We've got all these individual functions, and the conductor of the orchestra is saying, okay, I need you and you right now. And in a few minutes, I need you to come online and do your part. So we develop increased control as the brain becomes more complex over time. So that way, you and I right now, we're listening to each other, we're watching each other, we're blocking out distractions, we're making connections to apply the information while you're thinking about your next question. That takes a lot of things happening all at the same time in the brain. So when we think about maturity to me is how successful are you at multitasking the brain, of being able to use several functions together in the right timing and sequence and maintain that over time. So maturity is the ability to block out distractions and stay on task. So we do see when there's differences in connectivity in the brain, one of the things we see, for example, is challenges with task switching. A really interesting study that was published about 2 years ago out of UNC Chapel Hill was essentially saying you could pretty much predict the severity of ADHD based on task switching scores. So what that means is if I'm writing an email and my phone dings to say a text message comes through, I'm going to shift from my email to my text message to respond. And task switching should have me remember to come back to complete the task that I started. And the ADHD brain has a harder time remembering to return to what they started. And so there's just, so it's not immaturity in terms of, acting ridiculous or, melting down over nothing, but it is that ability to have the level of control to say my phone dinged. It did draw my attention, but I'm choosing to ignore it. Or if I respond, it's remembering to come back to what I finished.
Yeah.
So with differences in those brain structures that do impact emotional regulation or awareness of time, organization, and time management, you do see higher levels of risky behavior, higher levels of impulsivity, which can create challenges. But again, it's not coming from a choice in poor behavior, there's a reduction in control in some aspects of the brain.
Mm. Yeah, there's a metaphor that I like to use about because in ADHD brain there's a lack of dopamine receptors. It's almost like when the fuel light comes on in your car, the driver automatically looks at the fuel light and the beep, and it's an alarm that says to you, right, where are we going to get some fuel from? And in the brain, that's like, where are we going to get some dopamine from? It doesn't care whether it's good dopamine or bad dopamine, but it's now switched from the destination of where they were going to looking at alternatives for, and that takes you off course then. And it's because the alarm's gone off. We need some fuel. And, that leads to impulsivity, distractions, and beyond, like addictions as well. Like,
And to me, what's so fascinating with dopamine is understanding it does drive our behaviors because our brain wants to feel good. And when we've got fewer dopamine receptors in the brain, dopamine doesn't stay active in the brain for long. And so with fewer receptors, dopamine stays active for a shorter amount of time, which means then I'm craving that next dose of dopamine. So whether it's from positive things like exercise or learning something fascinating or connecting with a friend or something that can lead to unhealthy behaviors such as addictions, the brain it guides our behaviors. But when we think about executive functions, those are guided behaviors where I'm trying to accomplish a goal. So if you think about, the book that I wrote, that was a 2-year project. So it was a lot of work where the reward didn't come for 2 years. So that wasn't something I would have been able to do in my 30s. I didn't have the executive functions to continue to work so hard for a reward that was so delayed. So the more mature we are and the more dopamine receptors we have, we're better at being able to delay the reward. So if you think about this in a child, if I say to a 2-year-old, if you don't melt down today, then next Friday we're going to do something fun. 2-year-old's instant gratification. Then as we get older, I can start to say to my kids, hey, you stay on top of keeping your stuff picked up this week and you can pick a movie for Friday night. You can start to delay that reward, but that parlays with development. But here's the good news when it comes to ADHD and dopamine in the brain is it can change. We can see changes and improvements in executive function and an ability to delay that reward. So regardless of the frustration or the challenges being faced now, just like development and seeing that dopamine change over time, it's not too late for the adult brain to see changes and experience changes as well. So I'm all about understand where you are today and then build towards progress in the future.
yeah. Well, I think you've dangled the carrot in front of us now, and we all want to know what are those things that we can do that can, delay that gratification or improve, our brain health and dopamine.
Yeah. There's two different buckets. There's what can we do on a daily basis to optimize current function? And then what can we do over the long term to continue to build and enhance brain connectivity in the long run? So when we think about the daily habits, it's lifestyle. And it sounds like such simplistic things, but we can never overestimate the power and importance. Sleep hygiene is so key.
Mm.
A tired brain is a negative brain. And for all of us have a harder time staying on task, regulating mood and emotions when we're exhausted and when we're hungry. Our brain needs fuel and resources to function. And so making sure that we're fueling our body with good fuel. So, getting consistent carbohydrates and proteins and healthy fats that help to sustain the fuel for our brain rather than lots of added sugars and artificial food dyes and overly processed foods that drive up inflammation can mask good function in the brain. And so making sure that we're fueling our body consistently with good nutrition and getting good sleep are two of the simplest strategies. And I say simple.
Yeah.
Dopamine comes from sugar,
Yeah.
where sugar releases dopamine. So easier said than done, but two pieces that fall a little bit more within our control than a lot of other things in life.
Yeah. I mean, it's evil how the brain works because if you have had a bad night's sleep and you are tired, then I don't know if this is anecdotal or if you've got any proof for this, but it seems that the brain will go, right, we need some food and it's got to be bad food. It wants the bad food more, instantly when you're actually in that. So it's just like a never ending cycle.
It is, and that, you know, I've thought about this and haven't done it yet. I feel like I want a list in front of my kids' faces so when they go away to college or live on their own, that's like, here are healthy ways to get dopamine and here are unhealthy ways to get dopamine. What are you choosing? So you're craving the higher dopamine things when you're already in a negative place. So if you're
Mm.
already exhausted and stressed, then your brain's like, I want that quick fix of the sugar or the highly processed food. So understanding what your brain's telling you in that moment can then give you strategies to say, okay, what are other ways that I can make my brain feel better right now? And again, something that we can't underestimate the power of is physical activity and exercise. So I love talking about a system in the brain. It's called the reticular activating system, and it's our level of alertness in the brain.
Mhm.
So, our reticular activating system is what allows us to go to sleep at night. When we're asleep, we have all of the same sensory things happening around us, the dog barking outside, the weight of the blankets, the dark room. But because we're not engaging and using our muscles, it allows that system to gate or close. So now our brain isn't processing all of that information. It's signaled to our brain to go to sleep. But then the very first thing we do when we wake up in the morning is we stretch because that fires muscles that starts to signal to the brain, okay, now it's time to start processing that information. So I picture it like a garage door opening to say, okay, now we can start letting this information come in. So when our brain is feeling tired and sluggish, if we're having a hard time focusing, we see attention and memory dropping, we're more irritable, taking 3 to 5 minutes to engage muscles and boost heart rate is a quick strategy that's going to increase the level of alertness in your brain. It's signaling to your brain to pay attention and get engaged. It's increasing the level of arousal of the brain. So the old adage from school of sit up to pay attention is true. When we engage our core muscles, it's signaling to our brain to be awake. So that's, just back pocket strategy. And exercise is so important. So there's benefits for going for a long run or a long bike ride, but there's also benefits to just that short burst. And if you don't have time to do a 45-minute ride in the morning when you're exhausted, can you grab a jump rope and jump rope? Or if you've got no equipment, can you do a few burpees? Burpees makes me sweat and pants in no time at all, which is going to just kind of reset mechanisms in my brain.
Yeah. I try and think, I mean, this is a difficult mindset shift, but a lot of people, when they think about exercising or, making a concentrated effort to exercise, it's usually because they want some sort of superficial goal of looking better for the summer or getting back in shape after Christmas or whatever. And like you were talking about with writing your book, it's a 2-year process or it's a long process. So that gratification of feeling like you've succeeded takes a longer time to arrive. So if you're going through the effort of going through an exercise program, if you're not seeing results because your goal is to look better, then you're more likely to go, this isn't working and quit. But if you change the goal to be, if I do this 5 or 10 minute workout, I'm going to feel better today. And my goal is to fuel the brain, then you can achieve that because you'll say, yeah, I do feel better. And then just forget about how you look because there's an expression, look after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves. That will come. But if you change your goal, then you can always succeed in making yourself feel better that day.
And setting a goal is another dopamine release. Our brain
Yeah.
loves setting a goal and loves achieving the goal. But when we start to set a goal that's personal, something that you get excited about, the brain envisions how you're going to feel when you accomplish that goal. So if we can reframe that exercise goal from set aside, I'm gonna do a 45-minute cardio workout 5 times a week. start with, can I do 2 minutes one
Mm,
day? So set a short goal and then celebrate the success of that and then build from there. And it can be something as simple as, if you're in a Zoom call and your camera's off, can you stand at your desk and do some squat jumps or some
mhm.
lunges? Or, again, if feeling sluggish in the workday, can you walk to the mailbox and back and then add some jumping jacks in there? You can do that inside. You don't have to do that at the curb in front of the neighbors. But, it's just finding a short term small thing, start with just 2 minutes and build
Yeah.
from there. And when you feel good and you start to correlate I had a burst of activity, or I had a great brainstorm when I took that break, that is a reward in and of itself to show, okay, that strategy is really working.
Yeah. I mean, I sometimes, if I think, oh, I'm going to try and do a really long workout today, and, let's say I'm using an app or I'm putting a workout together myself, if I make it that long, in halfway through or even before that, I'm thinking, oh, this is boring now. But if I do, like, if I've got like an app that's doing kettlebells or something, if I just do that for 5 minutes, I'm more likely to go, oh, I did that and I achieved that. And then I'll go, well, I'll do 5 minutes in something else, like on a different app. And you'll probably do the same length as what you'd plan to do, but you're not getting bored because you're switching between different things and feeling like you've achieved each sort of small milestone. I'm curious to know, like you just mentioned about, you might be on a Zoom call and, can you get up and move about because that's going to be beneficial to you. I'm just curious to know because I've thought about this in terms of coaching, the difference between adults and children. And it does strike me as all the things that I try and get adults to do, I feel that they've got an autonomy, a certain amount of autonomy to be able to implement a lot of these things in their lives. If they're working from home, it's a lot easier because they can sort of got flexibility to stop and do things. If they're at work, it's a little bit more challenging, but they can, they're a grown adult, they can do these things. I do wonder though how easy it is to implement all the things that we know are good for helping with ADHD and brain health and that when they're at school and they seem to, they've got less autonomy and, they're being controlled by a teacher that's got to control everybody else in the class. I wonder, how do you find that balance of trying to sort of give advice to children, knowing that it's could be quite a challenge to implement a lot of these things?
We talk about this a lot in the book, in that, for me with kids, it's just starting with awareness. Is, as adults, we've had decades to identify our emotions and then correlate, when I feel this way and I choose this action, what's the end result of that? So for kids, it's really modeling things and building that awareness. So my kids roll their eyes at me and cringe on a regular basis, but I'm also starting to watch them make these choices and implement some of these things on their own. Not perfectly, not beautifully, but boy, is it a win when I see, my daughter last night saying, I've got to get to bed early. Tomorrow's a big day. I need to make sure I sleep ahead of time. So they really do hear our voices, especially when we repeat the same things over and over. And so to me, it's not just about what we're doing, but bringing awareness to it. And so when we talk about, hey, let's talk about the lunches we're going to pack for the week for school. So if I'm going to the grocery store, to make sure we have on hand what they want, it's, we fuel our brain first. And then if we're still hungry, then treats and snacks are okay. But first, let's give your brain what it needs, because both of my kids are athletes. They're in school all day. They've got homework. They're in high school. So they need a lot of fuel to get through the day. And so modeling that, we need fruit, vegetable, protein, carbohydrate, healthy fats. If you're still hungry after that, then absolutely, have some treats and snacks. But then also let's think of the timing of that. Don't have sugar right before you're going to bed when you're trying to get to bed at a good time. Or, for kids, if you're going out for dinner with the family and you want them to be well behaved in a nice restaurant, don't order the sugary soda, order water, or save the sugar for a dessert afterwards and then go let them run around outside. And same thing, with my kids, we always talk about how moving the body helps them regulate their mood and emotions and pay attention. And so when they come home from school, the last thing I want them to do is dive right into homework. I want them to move first. They both have sports after school. Excuse me. So that helps naturally at this age. And then if they're working on homework, oftentimes the homework load doesn't match the development of the child. So maybe you've got a 15-minute window of attention where you can sit and work for 15 minutes, but you've got 45 minutes of studying to do. So as a parent, I've got two choices. I can either break it up into 3 15-minute increments where we take a break and do something in between. It could be just a quick physical break. It could be, let's do part of this before dinner, part of this after dinner. Or if we're going to go longer than their window of attention, then I'm going to need to provide more support for this to be successful. If
Mm.
you've got a 15-minute window of attention and 45 minutes of work, it's just not realistic to think you're going to be able to do that on your own with success. So that additional support for me might be something as simple as I'm sitting there with them and not saying, come on, try harder, what's wrong, but how can I keep them more engaged in the task? And so can I quiz them? Can I read something and they're answering the questions? So I'm looking to see where can I support to meet the need.
Mm. I think what you said, what struck me there, you started talking about the starting with awareness, first of all, of what's going on in the brain and how that is useful for children. I think also, similarly, for an adult who learns later on in life that they have ADHD, or if they are become more aware of what's going on within the brain, just you saying, you have a 15-minute attention span, just understanding that it's an attention span due to the way that your brain is programmed changes the way you perceive not being able to focus after 15 minutes. Because if you're not aware of that, you quite easily will label that as being, oh, I'm stupid. I can't really get this because after 15 minutes, I can't. You may not associate the fact with, you can do whatever you need to do. It's just got to be in that window. It's just that you associate it with the fact that you failed after half an hour or whatever. And that awareness changes your relationship with yourself, I suppose, and allows you more freedom to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
But
That awareness, I don't want to attach an emotion or good or bad to it. Every single person has an attention window. And our attention window, by the way, vacillates throughout the day. If I'm exhausted, my natural window is going to be shorter. If I'm stressed, it's going to be shorter. If I've already gone through my attention now, each window after that is going to get a little bit shorter and a little bit shorter based on our available resources. So I'm not going to give an attribute to it. It's just simply my window of attention. It's not a good window or a bad window. It's knowing what it is. And I love when we talk about building awareness of the type of attention you're using in any given moment, because attention is something that's happening all the time, but we have different types of attention. So if you picture, you just did a 6-hour car ride today, the type of attention you're using on a long car ride, you're zoned out, your thoughts are wandering. It's when we're creative. It's when
Mhm.
we're consolidating memories. We're thinking about things in our past. We're worrying about things in the future. And you're paying enough attention to the environment that if a cow ran out in front of you, you could slam on the brakes and snap to heightened attention. But that low level of attention where your mind is wandering requires very little energy and resources. It's like biking on a flat road. You could do it forever and not get fatigued. However, you're not taking in what's happening around you and forming memories around your environment. So if you're sitting in class and your mind is wandering, you're not engaged with the content to be learning. So if you have that awareness of, okay, I started with focused attention where I was listening to the teacher, I was taking in information. When you're in that focused attention, that's when you're going to retain content. That's when you're going to be taking notes and connecting with the material. But that kind of attention takes a lot of energy and
Mm.
resources. So you can't maintain it for as long. But if you can say to yourself, oh my gosh, I just caught myself thinking about what I'm going to have for dinner tonight and what's going on after school today. I'm using the wrong kind of attention for this moment, and bringing that awareness to say, okay, I need to tell myself to shift back into focused attention. Just the power of being able to recognize the type of attention you're using in the moment. And then that tells you. So if it tells you what to do. So if I'm working and I'm writing something and I find myself checking my phone and my mind's wandering, that tells me I need a break and I need to reset, because
Mhm.
it's going to be really hard to force myself back into heightened attention if I'm tired, hungry, haven't moved. So I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to wander to the kitchen and grab a snack, or, squat jump, something. I'm going to move, or I'm going to fuel. To your point, it's easier to do that when we work from home. It's harder for kids to do that in class. But that's where conversations and relationships with the teacher are really helpful. And so if you talk to the teacher to say, we're working on building attentional awareness and empowering our child of knowing what to do to shift attention gears, can you help us with that? So if you notice my son Drew looking out the window instead of taking notes in math class, can you and Drew have an agreement where if that happens, it's okay if he stands at the back of the classroom to listen so he can engage muscles? Or can he run a quick errand, deliver some books to a teacher down the hall to move, to help re-engage the brain? Something that's not disruptive to the classroom, that's not embarrassing or going to call out the child in a negative way. But how can we celebrate that awareness and help him get back on track so that he can engage again?
Mm. I mean, that was kind of one of the reasons why I was thinking earlier about Montessori being a useful thing for kids with ADHD, because they have that sort of self, a child-led learning thing that if they do get distracted or realize they're getting distracted, they can go and do something else for a little while. And I know they don't call themselves teachers in that environment, but the teachers that are there, they do then sort of, after a little while, they might say, okay, you've been doing that for a little bit of a while. Do you maybe think about it? But it does allow them, if they've got that awareness, to do that without feeling like they are different or in any way or being treated differently. Um, I'm just very keen to, because we talked about fuel and food, and I wonder if, you have like a top five, I'm going to say superfood, and I don't mean superfoods, but what's your best, if you were going to say to somebody right now that they're going to the shops and they wanted to get the best food inside them for this week, what five things would you recommend that they put on their shopping list?
That's a hard question because easier to speak to what not to put in your cart.
Okay.
But I am going to say for the five things to put in your cart, whole foods. So, the less processed things are, um, the more nutrients you're going to pull from them. And the brain requires, we need variety. And so many of the kids that we work with at Brain Balance are really picky eaters. And when we're picky eaters, then there's going to be gaps in our nutrition.
Mm.
And we need a variety so that the brain and body have all of the building blocks it needs to support a growing brain and body. So I would want variety in what you pick, but I would want to see protein. I would want to see in whether that's, chicken or, black beans paired
Yeah.
with brown rice so that it's a complete protein. And I would want to see color so that we're getting in, I love sweet potato. I love spinach or broccoli. Avocado is great for that healthy fat. We want to think about things that fuel our body to sustain it. So sugar gives us a quick burst of energy, and then
Mm.
there's a crash. And when
Yeah.
we crash, we crave more, and our emotional regulation is off and our attention crashes with it. And so if we can add protein, carbohydrates, and healthy fats, then that's a slow burning fuel that's going to help us be more consistent. And so, if I think about if I were to pack the ultimate school lunch for my kids or the ultimate breakfast, I would love a breakfast. We do a lot of just quick protein smoothie and protein shake in the morning because we can we'll start with almond milk and put in the protein powder. And then I can put spinach into it and it blends up and they don't see it or taste it. And then I can add, an oil to it or an avocado with an avocado to it to get some healthy fat in. So it's quick, easy, convenient. You add a frozen banana or frozen cherries and it can sweeten it up and give some more flavor to it. And then lunch, if it's rice and uh, grilled chicken, but then we can add flavor to it, right? We can do a sweet, spicy barbecue sauce, and you know, healthy food can still be tasty and fun. It's a transition. If you're not there, you're not gonna get rid of all the processed food and switch to that right away. But again, if you lead with the fuel, fill up what your body needs first. And then if you're still craving the salty, crunchy, sweet, whatever, that's okay. It's not about perfection. But if we just lead with what the body needs, I'd want variety and hitting those nutrients.
Hmm. Hmm. I wonder, just considering the time that we've got left, I'm curious to know, you've mentioned in some of your research that you've done about the relationship between video games and mood swings. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
That fits back into our conversation around dopamine so perfectly. Playing video games or scrolling social media are ways that our brain can still receive dopamine. Video games are structured so that there's a constant reward. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we're home of some big game developers, and the game developers understand the neurology of the brain. They know how frequently those rewards need to happen. But what's really important to understand is, again, there's different types of attention we use in different moments. When we're playing a video game, you are in this not just focused attention, but this heightened state of attention. So you are paying rapt attention, and that is really draining as a resource.
Hmm.
So that heightened attention, and what's interesting, when we're in that heightened state of attention, you lose all concept of time. You lose all concept and awareness of what's happening around you, which is why suddenly, same thing happens when you're scrolling on your phone. I hop into bed, I'm just going to check my phone for a few minutes. And before I know it, it's been an hour and 15 minutes. And now it's later than what I wanted to go to bed. Same thing happens with video games. So we're in this heightened state of attention where we lose time awareness, and we're using this really high resource type of attention, which means when I'm done, I have depleted my reserves. My brain's exhausted, and a tired brain is a negative brain. So when our kids have spent, 2, 3 hours gaming, and we say, look, turn it off, it's time for dinner, you've got homework, and they start to push back, or, they're not being negative just because you're asking them to stop when they don't want to stop. We have allowed their resources to be depleted. So they have less emotional regulation and control, less awareness, and they're negative, and they're going to be, or because they're tired, they're going to be negative. And
Mm.
so we have got to, as parents and as adults for ourselves, we've got to have structure and awareness in place. And so, and it, again, I don't want to put an attribute or good or bad on it. If video games are something that you really enjoy, awesome. Let's find a healthy balance, and let's figure out the right time and place for that, which means there's going to be restrictions on time. And again, the restriction isn't because I'm trying to be mean. I don't want you to be miserable when you're done playing. And I don't want you gaming before homework or study, because you just drained all those resources that you need to study. So let's think about the timing of that. Let's save the game that you love playing as a reward for once you've completed the things that you need to do, but then also not in the hour before bed, because that's going to disrupt quality of sleep. So it's thinking about when we're using it and how we're using it and for how much time. So just like I want to set a child up for success for good behavior at dinner by not giving them a sugary soda at dinner, same thing with video games. So do you want to do it on a Saturday afternoon after chores and responsibilities are done? Awesome. And that's a great time to do it. And then I would sandwich that with physical activity before and after, because again, physical can help reset the brain. And so when the alarm goes off, because I'm not going to expect you to remember when to turn it off. We need an outside signal to say, hey, it's been X amount of time. And then before you come engage with me, go hop on your bike, go, jump on the trampoline in the backyard, go, do a couple burpees, have a snack, and then let's sit down and hang out.
Mm. And have you got it? I mean, to me, discussing that as a parent, I think, oh, that's a great strategy. But do you have any tips or tricks on how to negotiate that with the child? Because I think sometimes, I mean, I've had conversations recently about PDA, and just, telling an adult to do something sometimes can be received as, no, I'm not going to do that. And more, giving them the information and saying, would it be okay if we did this? Or maybe, they feel like they've got some autonomy over the decisions that they make. How have you got any success stories about how to negotiate that?
I'm going to say a couple of things, and this might not be popular, but there are times as a parent where it's not a negotiation. This is if you want a gaming system in the house, this is how we're going to use it. I'm going to give you the what and the why, whether you agree with it or don't agree with it. Here's what science tells us about gaming.
Yeah.
It's fun. Here's why you love it. Your brain loves it because when you score points and when you win, it's motivating and exciting. That's awesome. I love that for you. But here's what I also know about the brain. When we do it for too long, you're going to have a harder time. You're not going to feel good. Success with this it's an example in the book. I saw it with my son during the pandemic. We've always had structure and routine around that. We removed the limits at the beginning of the pandemic. Everybody was locked up and inside. And, he was online gaming with neighbors and with his cousin that lives across the country from us, which was so fun. And we saw a deterioration in his mood and his behavior. We saw an increase in anxiety. And so I pointed that out. And of course, he was like, no, it has nothing to do with it. We said, let's take a break. Let's set it aside for a little bit and then try it again. He ultimately made the decision on his own to set it aside because after he took a break and came back to it, he realized it was upping his anxiety and his angst. And he later described it as he was so intense in the game that even when the game ended, it was like he just couldn't shake that level of intensity. Not all kids are going to have that level of self-awareness, but until we spoon feed it to them, we can't expect them to develop that self-awareness. So this is a point where we need to parent it. Here is the structure. And I'm also going to tell you, if your kids are gaming 4 hours a day, don't change that to 30 minutes overnight. Sit down, have a conversation. As a family, we value and prioritize brain health and well-being. And we know that too much time on technology, whether it's gaming or scrolling social media, is really hurting mental health and brain health. People are more anxious, more depressed. So as a family, we're going to choose to prioritize this value and we're going to approach this together as a family. And then let's track it, stick a tracker on the fridge and, here's my average screen time a week as mom, dad, brother, sister, whomever, and then set a goal of, okay, can I reduce that by 10% for next week? So we've got a goal of here's what's a healthy amount of time. And then there's times where we're going to bend, right? If somebody's homesick, they have COVID and they can't go to school for a few days. Sure, I'm going to, go ahead and game a little bit longer. But I think it's having conversations. It's saying what your values are. It's giving the what and the why. And there's a time for choice and there's a time to say, as a parent, I know what's best for you and you don't have to agree with it, but here's what it's going to be. And for choice, I might say, during this school week, we just don't have time. But if you want to game for however amount of time on the weekend, I'm going to let you choose when, where, what. Like you can give choice within your outline or structure of what you.
Yeah. No, I'm on board with the sort of, this has to happen this way. I'm just also curious about, just wording it slightly so that it makes it feel like they might have a choice. Like, that the homework that you need to do, would you like that to be easy or hard? And if they say, I want it to be easy. Okay, well, if you want it to be easy, then we need the fuel that you need to use and that fuel's there now. If you use the game, it's not going to be. So you can still play the game. It's just you want your homework to be easy or hard. And then they're making a choice between easy or hard. And you say, okay, well, then it has to be first.
I love that framing. And this isn't going to be easy. It's not fun. The kids will push back because you're taking away what feels good to them. But I think it's also understanding what are they getting out of it? So what is it that they love about it? When I started asking questions, our daughter a couple of years ago, phone usage and social media usage went through the roof. And we were, trying to rein that in and do it in a way where it wasn't constant battle. Some days went better than others with that. But when we sat down and had a conversation of, what did she love about using it? Why was she enjoying it? It was the connection and feeling connected and the opportunity to get to know new people. So it was understanding her motivation allowed us to find other ways to fulfill that need that didn't involve as much Snapchat. And so, hey, can we get you involved in an activity that's not a sport or homework so that you're hanging out with friends? So that way, if she's together in person, then she's not needing to snap them. So they've got phones down and are interacting together. So I think also understanding what is it that they love about it.
Mm.
So celebrating that and then finding a place for that.
I think also as well, I mean, you're framing that in terms of a parent thinking, right, how can I get the child to, negotiate a healthier option or something and digging into why they do it. I think sometimes as adults, it's easy for us to just do things the way everybody else does them or how we've always done them without actually to question that ourselves. What is it that I'm actually getting out of this? What's my goal? And we may not sometimes analyze that ourselves and figure out whether there could be a better alternative to getting that social interaction than, just sitting there looking at whatever social media or.
That's such an important point. And I think often as adults, some of the choices that we make are to avoid our own thoughts. And so if I've got a ton of stress in my life or I'm processing something that's really emotional, when we're not actively engaged in something, when we're in that low level environmental attention where our thoughts are scanning from our past to our future, our own thoughts can be really stressful and really uncomfortable. And ways that we escape our thoughts are gaming, social media, drugs and alcohol. Those are all things that can put us in a different state so that we're not engaging with the thoughts. So acknowledging, am I gaming or on TikTok because I'm uncomfortable with my stressful thoughts? And that's an important thing to identify, because then what are other healthy ways that I can address the thoughts or distract myself another way? Can I read a book at night? That's how I turn off my brain when I'm stressed, is I'm mentally engaging in something else that is positive as far as a behavior rather than a negative behavior.
Yeah. I think also as well, a lot of workplace issues, relationship with procrastination or external validation can sometimes come from not really examining the why we feel like that. And that can cause problems with the way we approach work sometimes. Anyway, I think we've run out of time, but it's been fascinating talking with you. For any of the listeners that want to learn a little bit more about you, where can I send them on the internet to learn more? Where would you like them to go?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Dr. Rebecca Jackson. Brain Balance is brainbalance.com. It's a program here in the US, but we work with families, so live coached. So we work with families all around the world. And Instagram, Dr. Rebecca Jackson. And the book is Back on Track, a practical guide to help kids of all ages thrive. That is filled with both the short term and things that you can do to build over the long term. But I'm hopeful that I was able to provide some insights different than past conversations to continue this.
Oh, no. Hey, it's all been great stuff. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us and chatting with you. It's been brilliant. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Well, there we have it. Thank you so much for listening this far. If you want to hear more episodes, then please subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you use. It really helps to spread the word. So if you know anyone this episode could help, then please share it with your friends. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram at ADHD_goals, and you can find me on Facebook too. If you want to get in touch with the show, then you can email me at hello@adhdgoals.co. And finally, if you're struggling to manage your ADHD and you would like me to be your coach, then please head over to my website and get in touch. Until next time, bye for now.